essentially, for pyrite, you have a whole bunch of little cubes of iron and sulfide that you stack together and you create an octahedron. We all have seen lots of pyrite, it's super common. And we know that pyrite takes a bunch of different forms. So you can get cubes of pyrite, you can get a form of pyrite called a pyritohedron, which is a dodecahedron. So a dodecahedron is a 12-sided form, but it's called a pyritohedron because these are pentagonal sides, but they're not an equilateral pentagon. Instead, one of the sides is distinctly longer than the other, and pyrite forms these distinctive crystals right here. And then this is really cool. This is a very, very unusual pyrite. This is dendritic pyrite that they have found. What this is a slice of a black smoker from a deep sea vent, and they've sliced it. And this is pyrite that has precipitated from sulfur being emitted and iron being emitted from this black smoker and precipitated on the bottom of the ocean floor right there, and it forms these distinctive dendrites of pyrite that we essentially haven't found anywhere else. You can find them on these deep sea floors. So how do you create a cube, an octahedron, a pyritohedron, these other forms out of the same building blocks? Because you're not changing the iron, you're not changing the sulfur, you're not changing this basic building block, but what we see is quite variable. It's different.
Is that an actual photograph of the dendrites, or is that some kind of a false color image?
It's through a microscope. This is a photomicrograph.
Right. So, the dendrites look black.
Yes.
And is that actually how they appear to the naked eye, or?
Through a microscope. I don't know. I've only ever seen that's not my picture.
Right, yeah, I understand.
So these, through the microscope, do appear black because that's how pyrite looks in a microscope.
Is that transmitted light or reflected light?
This would be reflected light right here. Because this material around it, this kind of creamy material, that's aragonite.
That makes sense.
And so this is what aragonite appears when you have your upper polarizer in it. And so this is the pyrite right here.
Yeah, I was just wondering.
You said reflected light. It's not reflected light. It's with both polarizers in.
Oh,
So
okay.
reflected light's different.
Yeah.
So no, this is not reflected light. This is with a petrographic scope with both polarizers in.
Yeah. Okay. So you're just seeing the opacity because no light is coming through
That
those
is
crystals.
correct. That is correct.
Because there's so many different things happening in black smokers that I was wondering if perhaps there were other elements in the pyrite
Probably so.
altering it. Yeah.
I'm sure. I'm sure this is not pure pyrite right there.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's really a complex mixture of various sulfides. That's what that really is. Yeah. So what you do is you simply take your basic building block and you just organize it and stack those building blocks in different ways. And so we all know we can stack a cube and a whole bunch of cubes together and you get a big cube. So that's pretty easily understandable. And you can stack them in a way, essentially, if you shave the corners off a cube, what you have is an octahedron. And so you just stack these basic building blocks of pyrite together, and you create an octahedron, and you can do the same thing to create a dodecahedron too. So you have the same building blocks that you just form in a different way. So what you did, you can modify a cube to create a dodecahedron too by essentially shaving off all of your edges, and then you'll have created a dodecahedron as well. So you take the same basic building block, same atoms, you're not manipulating the atoms anywhere, and you're just stacking them differently to create these various forms of pyrite. And the control on whether it's a pyritohedron, a cube, an octahedron, a dendrite right here is environmental factors. So for some minerals it's temperature, for some minerals it's pressure, for some minerals it's pH, for some minerals it's concentration. What they found for pyrite is that it's a combination of temperature and fluid saturation is what's controlling what shape. So for a dendrite, if you think about it, you have 300 degrees Celsius hot fluids being emitted from the mantle, and they're contacting cold bottom seawater. And so you have this huge temperature contrast between your hot, ion laden fluid and these cold bottom waters. And so the cooling rate is extremely fast. Essentially, it's a quench. And you get this dendrites is characteristic when you either have very fast cooling rates or when you don't have a lot of ions in the solution. And so that's the reason these dendrites form, because you have this really fast cooling rate and you form this branching pattern. And it's the same thing like frost on a window. You have this branching pattern of ice, and if you have a lot of moisture, what's happening is that branches are essentially going to grow into each other and you just get a sheet of ice. So that's an example where concentration is important, because you simply don't have a lot. Or the most common dendrites are manganese. Most of the dendrites you see growing on the sides of like a limestone crack or something like that, that's a manganese oxide. And for that, it's a concentration thing too. But here it's mostly you have this really quick growth rate. For the rest of them, when you get a little slower growth, but still really high saturation of iron and sulfur, what you form are the pyritohedrons at slightly lower saturations. You form cubes, and at slightly lower saturations, you form octahedrons. And so for pyrite, it depends on cooling rate and degree of saturation of the fluid. So it's all the same building blocks, but it's environment that's controlling how you're doing those building blocks. So that's pyrite as an example. I use it because it's got all these different forms you can find it in, and people are like, well, how is this one a cube and this one's, a pyritohedron? When it's all the same material. Another example is fluorite. So fluorite commonly forms cubes or octahedrons right here. And it's the same building blocks, you just have calcium and fluoride. And what controls fluorite, once again, is an environmental factor. For it, it's temperature. So high temperature fluids that are full of calcium and fluoride, like you would have associated in with a magma, like hydrothermal fluids associated with the magma body. They would form your octahedrons. Your lower temperature fluids, like you would have in a sedimentary system, so you often, if you go out to the lake shore and, it has all that large limestone rubble out there, if you walk along it and you look down, you can find little purple fluorides in there. They're not nice cubes, but they're just little purple fluorides growing in the cracks, or that had grown in the cracks of the limestone. And that would be, if they had enough space, they would grow into cubes because they were low temperature fluids. And it turns out the cubic form is favored by low temperature fluids and fluorite. Your high temperatures are favoring octahedrons. And so you can have the same building blocks, but once again, environment is, exerts a strong control under, how you're arranging those building blocks. And I told you that the cubes, the octahedrons, the dodecahedrons, they're all related to each other because they all have identical symmetry. And that's how we all, as geologists, we all define, one aspect of a crystal, of these nicely shaped crystals, is what's the symmetry. And we use a three-dimensional axis to describe the relationship between crystal faces and edges and corners. And all of these forms have the exact same symmetry. They have the same number of mirror planes, they have the same number of rotational axes. It has the exact same symmetry. Even though they look different, they all have the same symmetry elements, and so we group them all together, and that's why pyrite can form cubes, octahedrons, especially dodecahedrons, because they all have the same symmetry. You're not going to find bladed pyrite. You're not going to find, pyramidal pyrite or these other forms because they have the wrong symmetry. You can't build those pyrites because they have the wrong symmetry. And so that fluorite, you can find cubes and octahedrons, but you're not going to find blades. You're not going to find these other ones because they don't have the right symmetry to them. So it's easy for a mineral to have multiple forms if all those forms have the identical symmetry to them. And so we group our minerals by that symmetry into what are called crystal systems. So the one I've been talking about up until now, where I use fluorite as an example, where you have cubes, octahedrons, dodecahedrons, trapezohedrons. That's your most symmetric of all possible crystals. And then we have 5 other different crystal systems, where the one that has the least amount of symmetry to it is called your monoclinic system. And these are all examples of minerals that crystallize in each of these systems. And then we have tetragonal, where tetra means 4. And if you look down on the top of these minerals, they look like little squares. Orthorhombic, that's a little bit more variable. Monoclinic and triclinic are your least symmetrical of your crystal systems. And then hexagonal, that's the one that I showed at the very beginning of beryl. So here's another example where that external form is reflected in that building blocks right there, where each of these spheres represents an ion, and these colors represent groups of ions that are bonded together right here. That's the different colors shown right here. And so beryl has beryllium, which makes beryl very special. And it's in the center of these blue areas. It has aluminum, which is in the center of these, did I say blue? Did I say green? Green areas. The pale blue right here is the center is aluminum, and these deep blue ones right here represent your silica right here. And you'll notice in beryl, they're in these distinctive rings right here. And it's kind of hard to see right there, but here's just one of those rings. And you can see it's a 6-membered ring, so there's silica in the center of each of these. These represent oxygen right here. And you can see this is a hexagon right here. So this is the basic building block of beryl, is you have these 6-membered hexagonal rings that are bonded essentially infinitely in that structure, and it's reflected in its external form. You look down that axis, and it's a hexagon. It's reflecting this internal atomic symmetry right here.
So
Yeah.
that image with the triangles and the circles represents a look at one plane through the crystal.
Yes.
Are further layers offset from those, or do they stack? Okay.
So the reason why this looks really complicated and not quite like this, because they have one layer of these 6-membered rings, and then below it, you have another layer that's slightly offset. So like this one would be right here on the layer below it. And so, yeah, so it looks like it's a 12-membered ring here, but that's not what a single layer looks like.
But they're collinear, because the opening is
It's a tube.
essentially the same.
Yes, it is.
And so does that ultimately form channels of void through the crystal?
Not a void. So what happens in barrel is a variety of different elements get stuck in these spaces.
That was a question. Was that what's in the center of the hexagon? Is it a negative space or is it
It's a variety.
a variety of things?
And that's why barrels have all the different
Colors. Okay.
Because if chromium is in the center of those 6-membered rings, it's going to cause that barrel to be green, and we call it an emerald. If it's trivalent iron in the center of those rings, it's going to be yellow, and we give the gem name Heliodor. If it's manganese in that 6-membered ring, it's going to turn pink. So our pink minerals, most of them are colored by the element manganese. And if it's divalent iron, so iron 2+ in those center areas, it causes it to turn this bluish color, and we call it aquamarine. So that's the reason that beryl has all these different colors, because certain elements impart different colors to minerals. And so depending on which element is stuck in that space, you're going to have a different color. It doesn't have to be a lot of it. Just a little of it will impact the color of it. So that's what's in it.
So going back a little, well, not
Okay, not literally.
if you have a pure barrel, it will be transparent and clear.
Yes.
Okay, so all of these other cations are just interlopers in the structure, if you will. Are there anions that go with them, generally oxygen, or?
You could have some water in those, but the water isn't going to impact color.
Right, it's that transition bond.
Exactly,
Yeah.
it's the transition
Okay.
elements.
So it's bonding to the oxygens in the ring?
Yes, it is bonded to the oxygens right there. So the silica has no charge left to give because
Right.
it's bonded to all the oxygens. And so its charge has been neutralized. It can't bond to anything else. And so that cation in the center, you have to have an overall positive charge here to bond with your negatively charged oxygens. Right there. Yeah. So that's why it's not going to be just oxygen hanging out in there. You need to have either cation or a molecule
But,
in there.
but even without these extra cations, the charge is balanced through the whole crystal.
That is correct.
Right, so,
These are like
So-
impurities in the structure.
right, there are impurities, but do they also imbalance the overall charge?
No, because what you would do is then you would just have an oxygen missing somewhere.
Okay, okay.
Yeah. To keep that charge balance.
Okay.
So that's why I'm saying you don't need a lot of them,
Mhm.
because you don't want to lose all the oxygens in your structure to maintain your charge balance. But yeah, you just need a little of them, and colors dramatically change. But yeah, so, beryllium, aluminum, silica, they don't impart color to minerals. You need those mostly either transition elements, or you need your lanthanides or your earths in there. And in graphite, it's the same thing. Graphite, most graphite we see is in like a schist or something like that, where individual grains are so tiny, even if you look at a microscope, they just look like, long, skinny sticks. But very, very rarely, you can find nicely formed graphite. And it's a hexagon. And it's reflecting internal atomic arrangement right here, where graphite is pure carbon. And you have those carbons, each carbon is bonded to 1, 2, 3 other carbons in these 6-membered rings right there. And that hexagonal form is manifested, once again, in what we see when we see a really nice graphite right here, which is a hexagon, which we don't usually see. And so we have these sheets of these hexagonal rings of carbon, and that's what they roll up ultimately to form things like, carbon nanofibers and things like that, which are really, really strong because the bonds in these sheets are our very strongest bonds, and then the bonds between the sheets are our very weakest bonds, which is why we can write with graphite, because we're shearing those very weakly bonded sheets apart, but those sheets stay together because they're extremely strongly bonded. So we just take those really strongly bonded sheets, roll them up into a fiber, and we create these extraordinarily strong fibers out of them. So why do we have, different shapes of different minerals? It's a reflection of internal atomic order and then specific environmental conditions. Is, the two things that control shape, essentially. Do y'all have any? You've been asking questions. Any questions, comments? I hope you had told me that's what you were interested in. So.
What was the aquamarine picture you had up there?
The aquamarine, it's iron that's in the structure
Okay.
that causes it to be that bluish color right there.
And what is that?
This,
Yes.
okay, this is a whole bunch of ions. This is before, we had easy access to computers and projectors. This is what we would use to teach crystal structures, where each of these, so the silver right here, so by convention, we talk about cations being in the center of the structure, and they're surrounded by your negatively charged anions, which would be represented in red right here. And so this would be a base, this one single cation bonded to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different anions. If you put a face right here, it would give you a cube.
Yes.
And that's essentially what that pyrite is, except each of these would represent, a little dumbbell of sulfur right here. And we just, infinitely stack all those cubes in all directions, and we have created our mineral right here. So that's what this is.
I've been thinking that for many years. What is that?
Yes. This is our atomic structure of a mineral, such as, well, this right here actually is fluorite. This would be calcium, and these are your fluorines. So that's one I have. So I don't teach mineralogy in this room, but I teach in a different room, and I have a whole bunch of these. Yeah. But mostly I just use and Anybody have any other questions?
If nobody has any other questions on the live feed, well, thank y'all for coming, and thank you for.
have things to look at.
Oh, yeah, I just have some pyrites.
Oh, okay, all right.
Some of the minerals I talked about. So I have a little bit of cubic pyrites, and I have a whole bunch of pyritohedrons that we want to take a look at.
This is
That's different pyrites. And some pyrites are striated on the surface, and some are not. And once again, that has to do with temperature and saturation, whether they're going to show striations on the surface. And then I have some fluorites in here. So I have some nice cubic fluorites. And then these are
Hey, Susie. Yeah, so I was saying.
two octahedral fluorides. Yes. An element is actually named after the mineral. And then I have some synthetic graphite here.
synthetic.
Greasy it is, and if you look really closely, you can see some that have that hexagonal form.
So there was. Oh, go ahead, Mal.
And that's
You had a question?
This is synthetic graphite.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. There was a question of, so like labradorite.
Strong enough light.
Yes.
So with labradorite and things that have the range of color, what's the crystalline structure of that, and how does the crystal structure impact the color shifting minerals?
Yes, so the play of colors that you
Yeah.
get inside of labradorite. So play of colors, it depends on the mineral why
Mm-hmm.
that is. So fluorite, some fluorites can have what look like an iridescence in
Mm-hmm.
them, and that's due to essentially a gap in the crystal in the cleavage. So light is reflected differently because there's essentially a hole in the middle of that mineral, and it changes how light's reflected, and what's transmitted and what's being absorbed in there. So for fluorite, it's because there essentially is missing space in the center of that crystal. Not a large amount of space, but it's there.
But enough to refract the light, like.
For opals, it's due to the spacing of the silicon oxygen in the opal. So opal's really interesting. I mean, it's not a true mineral. It's a mineraloid. And the silica and oxygen essentially bond to form these colloidal spheres in the structure. And you have a whole bunch of spheres that are stacked together to create opal. And what they have found is that the spheres have to be all of this one specific size range, and all of them have to be like that to have like a fire opal. You have to have this one specific range to get that play of colors. Whereas in, most other opals, you don't get that fireness. And it's due to the fact that the spheres may be differently sized, they might not be in the right size range. So you have to have this really specific set of conditions to form for opal to get that right light reflection. And it's I can't remember the range of the size of the spheres. And then you had asked about labradorite and the chatoyancy and labradorite, and I'm trying to think of the reason. And labradorite,
Like out of the feldspars, you get a calcine effect. That's also.
like asterism, is that what you're talking about?
No, not asterism, that's inclusion.
Yeah, those are inclusions.
Right.
But
These
the
are- these are
distinctive
small
play is,
dislocations or fractures.
yeah, they are they're dislocations in the lattice,
Yeah.
is what they are. For labradorite is what it is. Yeah, so it depends on the mineral.
Gotcha.
The reason that you get that play of colors.
You want to say, I found some hexagonal graphite in Essex County, New York.
Oh, what were you digging in? Some schists or?
Skarn.
Oh,
And it's
okay.
a big bag of all
Find
kinds of
anything in
neat
skarn.
little stuff. Yeah. I haven't even
How
identified
big?
it all. Oh, generally, little tiny things about the size of those artificial ones.
Oh, very cool.
Pass this now.
And some of the calcite was a gorgeous blue, and there were little pencil lead thin blue apatites too, that were electric blue, just gorgeous stuff.
You can find some cool stuff. Yes.
I bought a slab of petrified coal, and it's got specks of pyrite in it that one of the shows years ago. It's real unusual. I was just wondering how that happened. It got in the wood and it petrified, and this is slab.
So can I repeat it real quick? So you bought a slab of petrified palm at one of the shows, and it has pyrites. At one of our shows. Okay. And it's got pyrite within the slab.
Yeah. It's real unusual.
Yeah, I mean, you would need, for pyrite, you need those reducing anoxic conditions to precipitate that pyrite. So, obviously you had your trunk that was buried, and you have these, silica-rich fluids that essentially the silica latches itself to the cellulose of the tree, and over time completely replaces the cellulose on like a molecule by molecule basis. And, you just have these obviously anoxic conditions down there, and, all those different colors are because you had just like fluids with slightly different contents in them. So I'm guessing just have the right low oxygen conditions to have the pyrite form. Yeah, that sounds cool.
I mean, the pyrite formed in the rotting wood before it was replaced.
Absolutely, it could have. I have, without seeing it,
Yeah,
I don't
yeah.
know
I wish I
what
knew
happened.
this was happening, I took a picture of it. It's unusual, it's hard to see, unless you put a light, it's hard to see the specks.
They're that small.
Yeah, it's hard, I haven't looked at it all the time, but it's unusual.
Yeah.
I like gold, I collect different gold stuff, I did, and I would go display, and I saw
Oh, okay.
that pyrite, fool's gold, so I had to have it.
Yeah, interesting. I would hope so. Cool, I'd love to see that. It sounds very
So
interesting.
you're gonna, probably can't bring it to the show. It's real fragile.
Oh, yeah, you don't want to be carting that around.
I paid, I think I paid $200 for this piece, which I guess is okay, It's pretty.
If it's nice, then.
It's unusual.
Yeah.
I don't know if you ever heard anything like this before.
Yeah, I mean, I know very little about petrify, other than the process, what happens.
Okay.
My office is just right there, so, if you have anything ever to show me, I'm happy to see it.
I'll give you my address one day.
I was gonna ask you, is your house still field trip worthy?
Yeah, it's still a mess, but I gotta clean it up. I just sold my boat, almost 80 years old, and I have to start getting rid of stuff. And I didn't wanna get rid of my boat, cause I like to trade it hard, but I'm getting to where it's hard to do that. It's hard to do anything,
Yeah.
and, I just sold yesterday, able to do it.
Yeah. Well, if y'all or anybody else in the society ever has minerals that they're, too much or trying to move or downsizing, I'm always looking for stuff to teach with, so.
You know, I have like a museum in my house.
Oh, goodness, okay.
I got Civil War stuff, I got, all kind of stuff, meteorites, got a ton of petrified wood in the backyard. Just slowly have to clean the house up, it's not that bad.
Okay, yeah. Well, you got some cool stuff.
Do you know if C's has set a date with the Cove for their,
I think
auction?
so. I have it on my calendar, so
Okay.
I think,
Barry was supposed to tell me when she knew the final result. They were shooting for the 17th.
yes, that's the date I have, that Friday.
So
But whether it's final, I don't know.
Oh, okay.
So as of right now,
Email her.
Yes.
so as of right now, the C's organization for UNO has their auction on the 17th.
Friday the
Yeah,
7th.
but as far as I'm aware, it's not finalized yet.
Gotcha.
So I'll get in touch with them as my life gets easier.
Okay. All right. Right. After the show, so that's 17th. Okay.
Photographs of the things that
Oh,
they have.
good.
And then
Okay.
I have a box of donations for them.
Excellent.
And then there's some things that I need to re-photograph because despite taking good pictures, I didn't get a good one.
It's a fundraiser for the student organization here at UNO.
It's usually a fun event.
Yeah,
Mhm.
it's usually lots of fun, hanging out, having drinks, and,
And speak
looking
of,
at
we're
some
gonna,
nice minerals.
and we'll say bye to the people online. So, everybody, that's a wrap. Thanks for coming, and we'll catch y'all around.